As a lawyer in private practice, I sometimes have to do what I think is going to be effective. And tonight, I think for the first time, I brought out of my law office something that was very special to me. This is a pen from Governor Pataki. And this pen was awarded to me in November 2007. 3 months before, in August, the governor had signed a bill permitting for the first time yeshivas and all religious schools to fingerprint their employees and do criminal background searches. There was an old law in the New York State labor law from 1937 which had prohibited private schools from doing such a thing. Let me tell you about the ceremony that took place. It happened to have been election day back then in 2007. I was in my law office when a UPS box arrived with a return address of the New York State Senate. I had analyzed correctly that Senator Dean Skelos, the Deputy Majority Leader of the Senate, and the bill sponsor had sent me something special, and I was correct. The history behind the pen that I just held up was that from 2002 to 2005, I had attempted unsuccessfully to persuade the organized yeshiva world to enact a national background check system similar to what the Catholic Church had done. In this manner, we would avoid hiring registered sex offenders and other dangerous persons with criminal histories who should not be working in close proximity to children. Indeed, there have been incidents in our yeshivas where employees with criminal records have been hired and they have assaulted our children in a Makam Kadosh, a holy place where we parents had assumed they would be perfectly safe. The background check issue originally came to my attention because as a private lawyer I was handling a civil case for damages in which a church janitor with a criminal record had sexually assaulted a 7-year-old child. Frustrated by the inability of our organized yeshiva world to construct a background check system, I wrote 2 long letters, more like legal briefs, first to Governor Pataki and then to New York State legislative leaders, laying out all of my arguments for the need of a new law that would require our yeshivas to fingerprint their employees. I made many points in my legal brief-like letters, and among them was that in 1994 it became federal law that all state, public, and private schools could have access to the FBI National Criminal History Database, which contains tens of millions of fingerprints of people who unfortunately have been convicted of some serious crimes. I wrote that as a result of this 1994 federal law, 42 states in our country now require their public schools to fingerprint their employees. I also wrote and very much emphasized that 12 states, including several large states, required their private and religious schools to fingerprint their employees, including California, Illinois, Michigan, Florida, Massachusetts, and Maryland. And you'll note that some of these states have very significant Jewish and yeshiva populations. I wrote that New York State actually prohibited yeshivas from fingerprinting, and the law needed to be changed to make it mandatory. I also wrote that an organization of 1,000 Orthodox rabbis, the Rabbinical Council of America, had formally endorsed mandatory fingerprinting and background checks for yeshiva employees. An idea then took hold in the New York State Legislature. A bill would be written, which it was, first permitting religious schools to fingerprint their employees. And assuming the passage of that optional fingerprint bill, the plan was that the next year a bill would be introduced making fingerprinting mandatory for all yeshivas and non-public schools in New York State. Sure enough, the optional fingerprint bill passed, and I won this pen from the governor. Pick it up? The rabbi says pick it up? I'll pick it up. I lost my place. And I won this pen from the governor. But the next year, the promise was kept. A bill was introduced making it mandatory for all religious schools to fingerprint their employees. And the bill passed the New York State Senate, but the bill did not pass the New York State Assembly. In fact, the bill never made it to the floor of the New York State Assembly. And I got upset. And an upset Even angry lawyers is a very dangerous thing in New York State, I can tell you. Because I know my way around the courthouse a little bit. I'm a trial lawyer, I'm an appellate lawyer, and sometimes we prevail. So we went forward, and we, a group of professionals, psychologists, physicians, rabbis, lawyers, and survivor advocates, many of them here tonight, began to network. Together we studied the law, the psychology, the medicine, and the Torah of child abuse very, very intensely. Together we formed a non-profit corporation, an IRS 501c3, the Jewish Board of Advocates for Children. High on our agenda is extending all of the child safety laws that protect public school children to the religious and non-public schools. Now, you are now aware that in New York State it is only optional, not mandatory, for yeshivas to fingerprint their employees, while in public schools it is absolutely and legally required. But did you also know that in the 3 years that the optional fingerprint law has been in existence, there is only one yeshiva, the North Shore Hebrew Academy in Great Neck, which is fingerprinting. There are 390 private Jewish schools in New York State educating about 125,000 Jewish children. Perhaps a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. As we sit here now, our children are therefore exposed to actually convicted sex offenders, drug offenders, violent offenders, and even paroled murderers who may be working in our midst. And I emphasize that there have been incidents. And I'm not saying this based on hearsay, I'm testifying basically on personal knowledge. Did you also know that public schools are legally required to have defibrillators paid for by school boards? There is no such law for non-public schools. I ask you, is this right? Is this fair? Is it right and fair for a human being to have, God forbid, a heart attack in a public school and literally brought back to life, while in a religious school he fades away and dies? My friends, it is not fair, it is not right. Is it fair and right that public education departments in New York State are required to maintain registries of people who are dangerous and unfit and may not work in public schools? But the religious schools are exempt from keeping such a registry, and there have been disastrous results. And again, I'm testifying based on personal knowledge, not on hearsay. Pedophiles have been known to move from one private school to another, and absolutely nobody is keeping track. Nobody. My friends, it is not fair, it is not right. Is it fair and right that silent resignations of sexually and physically abusive employees are prohibited in the public schools, but in the religious schools, abusive employees have been shifted from one yeshiva to another and go on to inflict more harm? It is not fair and it is not right. Is it fair and right that all public school employees are unambiguously mandated reporters to the government of any type of child abuse, but the religious schools are exempt? Again, it is not fair and it is not right. Is it fair and right that in the public schools, sexually abusive employees are subject to legally mandated discipline, including suspension or termination, while in the religious schools, a slithery, poisonous snake like Yuri Kolko is allowed to work in a yeshiva for decade after decade, inflicting harm, and nothing happens? Until a small group of people, including me, agitate on a blog and elsewhere, and a brave New York City police detective and parents and children finally bring that so-called man to justice. Again, and that detective, by the way, her name is Jennifer Molinari. It is not fair and it is not right. Is it fair and right that in the public schools, physically abusive employees are subject to legally mandated discipline, but in some yeshivas, children are still being slapped and pushed and pulled, and in a couple cases I know of, and again, this is not based on hearsay but on personal knowledge, children have been punched and choked by rabbis, and again, nothing happens. It is not fair and it is not right. Is it fair and right that in the public schools, only legally certified teachers may teach secular subjects, reading, writing, and arithmetic, but the religious schools may hire anybody who knows how to add 2 plus 2? Not fair, not right. Is it fair and right that safety and health plans are legally required for the public schools in case of emergency, but the non-public schools are exempt? We just heard an event that happened in California where one child was trained and one child wasn't, and the child who was trained thrived and the other one didn't. So I say again, it's not fair and that it's not right. I've said over and over and over again that New York State has the weakest laws in the country for protecting religious school children. And that's not fair and that's not right. Now, why are things this way? There seems to be a misconception that the government may not regulate religious institutions. This is a complete and utter fallacy. There are U.S. Supreme Court and other appellate court decisions, clear as day, which hold that neutral laws which regulate public health and safety may be applied to religious institutions. Basic police and fire protection and mandatory vaccination laws apply equal to public and religious school children without any constitutional problem. The government is not establishing any religion in violation of the First Amendment. In the absence of child protection laws safeguarding our children, is it any wonder that Catholic and Jewish institutions have been afflicted with a terrible problem of abuse? Catholic schools are closing. Their numbers are shrinking. Our own numbers have plateaued, and we now have Orthodox families sending some of their children to public school, or they are homeschooling, and it's not their choice because they don't have the money. Depending upon who you ask and how you count, there are about 100,000 to 135,000 Jewish children attending private schools in New York State. Overall, there are 450,000 non-public school children in New York State, about 15% of the total. It's a very large number. We have lots of Jewish and Catholic people here in New York. These children need to be brought under the protective umbrella of New York child protection laws. I'm now going to hold up a critical document. This is basically a legal brief entitled Position Paper to the New York State Legislature Advocating Child Protection Laws for Non-Public Schools. It was the product of a tremendous amount of work, and it was produced by our organization. It's one of the most important legal briefs I have ever filed. There are 3 critical articles here, and it's available on our website. First, there is my article arguing for all of the child protection laws that I just described. Next, there is the article authored by Rabbi Mark Dratch of Yeshiva University, a rabbinic board member, who persuasively argues that mandatory employee fingerprinting is a halachic imperative. Finally, we have a brilliant article from a Cincinnati psychiatrist, Dr. Nachum Klafter, describing the long-term effects of child sex abuse. Also appearing in this paper are the 2 resolutions of the RCA, the Rabbinical Council of America, endorsing child protection legislation for yeshivas and all non-public schools in New York. We also have a relatively short petition signed by 240 good people under very short notice in which they also endorse legislative change. I know what's on your minds at this point. What can you do to make things better? First of all, go onto our website and please read our position paper, and if you're persuaded by it, please sign our petition. And talk it up. Make copies. Bring it to shul. Tell your friends. Tell them to visit our website and read our paper. Bring these ideas to your yeshivas. Ask them, why aren't they doing fingerprinting? Why? This isn't in my speech, but if you look at your fingerprints, and the science of fingerprinting is about 100, 120 years old, the science of fingerprinting was found by a man named Sir Francis Galton, a genius from England. And there are 3 patterns: loops, whorls, and arches. And no 2 sets of fingerprints are alike. God gave us these fingerprints for a couple purposes. First of all, if we didn't have them, things would slide off our hands, literally. And second of all, to identify us for both criminal and civil purposes. Also, if you have what you think is a good idea to move our agenda, contact us. I thank you all for your kind attention. May God bless us with siyata d'shmaya.